They called me dead weight, so I gave them the mortgage bill and moved to Florida. I was folding towels in the kitchen when I heard them. Their voices were hushed, but I'd lived long enough to know when people were trying not to be heard. "You need to say something," Clara whispered, her tone tight with impatience. "Your mother can't live with us forever. She's not helping, she just takes up space." "She raised you," Michael mumbled. "That's not the point," she snapped. "We've got bills, stress, and she just sits there all day. She's dead weight." I froze. The towel in my hand slipped onto the counter. "Dead weight." "I heard you," I said softly, stepping into the doorway. Clara flinched. Michael turned, eyes wide. Mom, that's not what she meant," he stammered. "It is," I said. "You just didn't think I'd be listening." They said nothing. I walked back into the kitchen, folded the last towel with shaking hands, and placed it on the stack. My heartbeat stayed steady, slow but strong. I had lived through far worse than words, but still, some words stayed. That night at dinner, I spilled a bowl of soup. My hand trembled. Arthritis had been cruel lately, and the bowl slipped just as I set it down. "Seriously," Clara hissed. Hot broth soaked the tablecloth, then dripped onto her lap. "I'm sorry," I murmured, reaching for a napkin. Before I could move, she slapped my hand away hard, then she slapped my face. It wasn't the sting that hurt, it was the silence that followed. Michael just stood there. He didn't yell, he didn't ask her what she thought she was doing. He just looked at me, then looked away. In that moment, I realized he wouldn't defend me, not even against this. Then came the sound of a door opening. "Mom," Anne's voice. My daughter, my youngest, the one I hadn't seen in over a year. She stood at the threshold, suitcase still in hand, face stunned. She had just come from signing her divorce papers. I knew because she had called me 3 days ago, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. She saw my red cheek, the spilled soup, the way I was holding myself together with nothing but shame. Then she saw Clara, and she didn't hesitate. The slap echoed. Clara staggered back, stunned. "You touch my mother again," Anne said through clenched teeth, "and I will break both your hands." Michael jumped up. "What the hell, Anne? You don't live here. You don't get to come in here and act like some hero." Anne turned slowly. "You let your wife hit Mom and said nothing. You let her call Mom a burden and just stood there like a coward." "She's not helping us," he snapped. "She just takes up space, just like you, a divorced parasite who ran back to her mother the second life got hard." Anne recoiled like he'd hit her too. "You're just like her," he spat. "Both of you, useless." That's when I stepped between them. "Enough," I said. They both froze. I looked at Anne. "You're not useless." Then I turned to Michael. "And you're not my son anymore." His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I walked away and sat in my chair by the window, the one they all said I stared out of like a ghost. But I wasn't a ghost. I was very much alive, and I was done. There was a time I believed that giving would guarantee love, that the more you gave, the more you'd be cherished. I believed that loyalty paid forward in silence would one day echo back in warmth. I was wrong. I sold my house to help Michael buy his. It was a small brick home I'd lived in since he was 9. The paint peeled on the porch. The plumbing was stubborn, but it was mine, bought with every graveyard shift, every penny I saved by mending clothes and skipping vacations. That house saw me through widowhood, through Michael's college years, through the hardest winters of my life. When he and Clara were expecting their second child, they came to me with wide eyes and hopeful voices. "There's this perfect house, Mom," Michael said. "Good schools, a yard, room for everyone, but we're short on the down payment." I didn't even blink. "How much do you need?" They said a number. I wired it within a week. I didn't ask to be on the deed. I didn't want them to feel burdened. Just a home for the babies, I told myself. They'll know what this meant. They didn't. I moved into their guest room, a space between the laundry and the garage, no window, a mattress on the floor. But I told myself it was enough. I was close to the grandchildren. I could help. I could belong. And I did help more than they'll ever admit. I watched the kids every weekday. Pickups, drop-offs, fevers, nightmares, homework, bedtime songs. I cooked dinner most nights, washed their clothes, repaired ripped backpacks, never asked for a cent. Then one month, I noticed an envelope on the counter marked final notice. The mortgage. Michael brushed it off. Clara had to leave her job early. Things are tight for now, so I paid it quietly. I set up a monthly payment to cover half the mortgage. I never told them. I didn't want to embarrass him. He was my son. Month after month, I paid, and they never asked where the money came from. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they didn't care. Clara changed slowly. At first it was small things, rolling her eyes when I offered to make lunch, correcting me sharply when I told the kids old family stories. "Mom, don't confuse them," she'd say. "They're learning a different way now." Then came the bigger things. "I think we need more space," she said one afternoon, glancing at toys cluttering the living room. "Maybe if the guest room were open, we could turn it into a playroom." I said nothing, just nodded and gathered my knitting. Another day, I overheard her on the phone. "No, she doesn't pay rent, but she eats, uses water, electricity. It adds up." And once, while handing me a shopping list, she added, "Might be nice if you started picking up your own groceries." "I mean, you do eat a lot of yogurt." Michael never said a word. When I looked to him for comfort, he looked away. The worst part, I kept trying. I baked her favorite bread even after she called my recipes dated. I folded her laundry when she left it in the machine for days. I sewed buttons on her blouses when they popped. She never noticed. And when she did speak to me, it was to remind me, "You're lucky we have space for you. Not every family does." She said that more than once, as if the thousands I gave, the meals I cooked, the nights I sat awake holding her crying child, were all a favor I should thank her for. And Michael, my sweet boy who once built me birthday cards from macaroni, he just let her. He stood beside her, silent. One evening, I burned the rice. Clara walked into the kitchen, sniffed the air, and laughed. "Well," she said, "I guess you really are getting old." Michael said nothing. That night I sat on the back steps, the Florida heat pressing into my skin, and stared at the horizon until it blurred. How many times had I given them the last slice, the warmest blanket, the best part of me? I thought of the house I gave up, the porch swing, the daffodils, my name carved into the pantry beam right beside Michael's messy fourth-grade letters. Gone, given away. Still, I stayed, because mothers stay, even when they're treated like furniture, even when kindness is repaid with contempt, even when your name is no longer spoken with reverence but as an inconvenience. But something shifted in me the day Clara slapped my hand away from the soup. The moment her fingers met my face and Michael didn't move, that shift turned into resolve. And that resolve would lead me to do something I never thought I had the strength to do. I called the bank on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply confirmed what I already knew, that my name was still listed as the payee on the monthly mortgage, even though I wasn't on the deed. They pulled up the file. The woman on the other end was polite, too polite, the way people are when they're reading numbers that don't make sense. "Yes, Mrs. Harper," she said, "it looks like you've been making the partial payments since July and also an additional lump sum last December." "That's correct," I said. "And would you like to continue these payments?" "No," I said. "I'd like to stop today." Silence. "I'd also like the remaining balance, all future communications, and every financial document going forward redirected to the homeowners, Michael and Clara Harper." She paused. "Of course. I can finalize that request today." "Please do," I said, "and email me a copy of the confirmation." I hung up, opened my laptop, and printed the letter the bank sent just 2 hours later. I folded it neatly and slid it into an envelope with the final receipt of my last payment. That afternoon, I made soup, lentil, Michael's favorite. Once upon a time, I baked bread. I set the table. I placed 3 plates out. And in the center of the table, I laid the envelope beside the salt shaker. When they arrived home, I greeted them like nothing had changed. Clara walked in first, pulling off her heels and dropping them on the floor as usual. Michael followed, his phone still pressed to his ear. Dinner was quiet, the clink of cutlery, the ticking wall clock. When the plates were nearly empty, I reached for the envelope and placed it between them. "What's that?" Clara asked without looking. I wiped my hands on my napkin. "That," I said, "is the last mortgage payment I will ever make." She blinked. "Excuse me, I called the bank this morning," I said. "Told them to send everything to the legal homeowners, you too. From now on, all responsibility is yours." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Michael finally looked up from his plate. "Mom, I heard you," I said. "Last week in the living room you said I was dead weight," Clara scoffed. "That's not—" "Yes," I interrupted, "it is, and now I'm removing the weight." Michael's face turned red, his eyes dropped to the table. "I've paid this house for 3 years," I continued. "Half the mortgage, the down payment, groceries, repairs. I've cooked your meals, raised your children, stayed quiet when you rolled your eyes, and turned away when you turned cold. I reached down, lifted my small suitcase from beside my chair, and set it upright. But now the givers are done giving. Clara stood up, her voice rising. You can't just leave. What about the kids? You can't just drop this on us. I can, I said, and I am. Michael looked like a boy again. One who'd done something wrong and didn't know how to undo it. Mom, please, let's talk. I turned to him. My son, you let her slap me, I said low and calm. You let her call me names. And when your sister stood up for me, you called her trash. You stood behind her every time, even when you knew she was wrong. His eyes filled with tears, but not a word came out. I'll be gone in the morning, I said. You'll get the keys back. You can convert the guest room, do what you like. Where will you go? He whispered. I smiled. Where I'm not dead weight. I wheeled my suitcase to the bottom of the stairs, climbed up slowly, and gathered the last of my things. A few sweaters, a photo album, and my late husband's watch. That night I slept like a stone. In the morning, before the sun rose, I brewed coffee for myself one last time in their kitchen. I placed my house key on the counter. No note. No goodbyes, just the click of the door behind me and the long, quiet walk toward freedom. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I packed what I needed, a week's worth of clothes, my birth certificate, my pension papers. The recipe box with my mother's handwriting, and the photo of Michael and Anne as toddlers in the backyard, mouths sticky with watermelon. I left the house key on the counter next to a cooling cup of coffee, one last act of routine. No farewell note. At 5:40 a.m., I rolled my little suitcase down the street to the bus stop, the wheels clicking softly against the pavement. The morning air was thick with quiet. A neighbor watering his lawn waved. I waved back. He had no idea I was disappearing. The Greyhound bus was half full, the vinyl seats cracked with time, the air stale but not unkind. I sat near the window and watched the city shrink behind me. The place where I had lived like a shadow in someone else's house. I didn't cry, there was nothing left to grieve. I rode through Georgia's sleepy hills into the warm breath of the South. Hours passed in silence. I ate saltines from my coat pocket. I wrote a few lines in my journal, then I stared out at endless fields. I thought about Anne, the daughter I hadn't seen in over a year. She lived in Sarasota now. Last time we spoke, she was whispering through tears. I think I'm done, I just don't know how to leave him. I knew that voice. I had once used it myself. When I finally arrived, the air in Florida felt different, softer somehow, even in the heat. I stepped off the bus into sunlight and cicadas, my suitcase bumping behind me like an old friend. Anne lived in a modest apartment complex just outside town. I walked the last 2 blocks. Her building was beige with chipped railings and a cracked sidewalk. I climbed the stairs to her unit, knocked twice, and waited. When she opened the door, her breath caught. "Mom," she whispered. She looked thinner than I remembered. Her eyes were tired. Her lips swollen beneath a faint smear of makeup. She had always been good at covering bruises. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Neither did she. We just looked at each other, 2 women worn thin from being quiet too long. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. No words, just arms, just warmth. The kind of embrace you only give when something inside you breaks open. I held her for what felt like hours. We didn't need to explain. We knew we had both survived houses where love had conditions, where silence was safer than truth, where the cost of staying was your own reflection. Inside, the apartment was small, 1 bedroom, second-hand furniture. The air conditioner rattling like it might give up at any moment, but it was clean, lived in, real. I was just making tea, Anne said, wiping her face. I nodded, sat at her kitchen table, and let her pour me a cup. There were no questions like, "Why are you here?" or "What happened?" She just placed the cup in front of me, sat across from me, and reached for my hand. And we sat like that, no explanations, no justifications, just 2 women who had finally come home to each other. Anne didn't speak much the first few days. She moved quietly around the apartment like she was always bracing for something, for someone. She flinched when her phone buzzed. She kept her back to windows. And at night, even in her own home, she locked every door twice. I didn't push. I folded laundry while she worked late shifts. I made soup and left notes by her coffee mug. I swept the floor. I waited. One night, as rain tapped gently against the window, we sat together on her worn couch. And finally she said the words I knew were buried deep in her chest. "He calls me garbage." I turned toward her, but she wasn't looking at me. She stared at the floor like she couldn't bear to see my face. "Not just when we fight," she whispered. All the time, when I forget to take out the trash, when dinner is late, when I speak too softly, too loudly. When I breathe wrong, her hands were clasped in her lap, knuckles white. He took my car keys last month, said I didn't deserve to leave, that if I left no one would take me back, that even my own mother wouldn't want me. She looked up at me then, eyes filled with something far deeper than sadness. Was he right? My throat tightened. I reached for her hand. It was cold, trembling, so different from the small fingers I used to braid hair for before school. He's wrong, I said firmly. He was always wrong. Her lip quivered. She tried to speak, then broke down instead. She sobbed into my lap like a child again, and I stroked her hair like I had when she was 5 and afraid of thunder. That night, she told me everything. How the bruises weren't always from falling, how he checked her phone every night, how he once made her kneel on the bathroom floor for an hour because she bought the wrong kind of milk. How she stopped laughing 2 years ago and hadn't noticed until now. I didn't cry, I just held her. And when her tears dried, I said softly, "If you can't leave yet, I'll take you. I'll carry you out myself if I have to." She didn't respond, she just leaned into my shoulder. We spent the next few weeks slowly untangling her life. She started saving her paychecks in a hidden envelope. I helped her make a list of what she'd need to take. We practiced what she'd say, who she could call, where she could go, but fear is a stubborn guest, it clings. "I don't want to start over," she whispered one morning. "I'm 39. I'm tired, what if I fail?" I took her hands in mine. "You're not starting over," I said. "You're picking up where someone else tried to end you." And then something shifted. She began to walk straighter. She smiled rarely, but when she did, it wasn't forced. She stopped checking the window every hour. Then one Sunday afternoon, she stood in the doorway holding a thick envelope with trembling hands. "Divorce papers," she said. I signed. My breath caught. "Are you sure?" I asked gently. She nodded. "It's time." I rose from my chair, walked over and wrapped my arms around her. "You saved me," she whispered. "No," I said. "We saved each other." Because in her freedom, I found mine too. We found the apartment by accident. It was a small place on the edge of town, tucked above a seafood market and one street over from the beach. The paint was chipped. The plumbing was temperamental, but the windows caught the sunrise like they were built to remember beauty. Anne stood in the doorway with the lease in her hand, eyes shining. "Can we really do this?" she asked, almost afraid to hope. "We already are," I said. We moved in a week later with only what we needed. A few bags of clothes, a kettle, 2 folding chairs, and a second-hand sofa that smelled faintly of cinnamon. We didn't bring the past with us. Just the parts of ourselves we were still learning to love. Our days settled into rhythm. Anne began selling handmade jewelry online, something she'd once done as a hobby in college. I helped with packaging and shipping, learning the little codes and tools she used. We set up a small corner of the living room with boxes, twine, and tissue paper. Every sale felt like a small victory. A piece of her independence delivered. I started baking again, just small batches. Oatmeal cookies, banana bread, butter rolls. We posted a few photos online, and within weeks we were taking local orders from neighbors and tourists. They started calling it mother and daughter goods. The name stuck. We didn't make much, but we didn't need much. Each morning I rose with the light, brewed strong tea and sat by the open window with my journal. I wrote not to remember but to release, pages filled with everything I had held back. The disappointment, the heartbreak, the slow dying of a mother's hope, but also the small joys, the sun on Anne's shoulders, the smell of the sea at dawn. The laughter, real laughter, slowly returning to her voice. She began to paint again. Seashells, postcards, little frames we hung around the apartment. At night we sat on the floor and ate simply rice, vegetables, sometimes a grilled fish with lemon. Soft music played in the background. We talked about books, about nothing. We didn't talk about Michael, or Clara, or the house I left behind. We didn't need to. One night as I closed my journal, I glanced over at Anne. She had fallen asleep on the sofa, head tilted back, arms crossed, a faint smile on her lips. Not the anxious sleep she used to have. This was peaceful, the kind of sleep that only comes when you finally feel safe. And in that moment, watching her breathe without fear, I knew I had done the right thing. I hadn't just left a house. I had walked away from silence, from being unseen, from being needed only when convenient. I had chosen to live. Not as an obligation, but as a woman who still had chapters left to write. That night, I slept without weight on my chest for the first time in years. The phone rang on a Tuesday. I almost didn't answer. Anne was in the kitchen humming while stirring soup, and I was clipping dead leaves from a basil plant. The number flashed, a familiar area code, a number I hadn't seen in months. I picked up. "Grandma, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, my heart tightening. It was Lily. There was a pause. "Grandma, Mom and Dad are scared. The bank sent a letter, something about foreclosure." I sat down slowly. "Dad's been crying," she whispered. "They were fighting last night. He said they're going to lose the house." Another pause. "He said it was your house first." Then the phone clicked. She had handed it to him. "Mom," Michael's voice shaky, older. "I'm sorry," he said in one breath. "I should have stopped her. I should have said something. I thought we had time." "Why are you calling me now?" I asked quietly. Silence. "We need help," he finally said. "They're going to take the house. Please come back. We can make space for you again." I laughed softly, sad, not bitter. "Michael," I said gently, "do you remember the day Clara called me dead weight?" His breath caught. "Yes." "Do you remember what you did?" Silence. "Nothing," I answered for him. "You did nothing. And now you remember I exist because the bank does too." He sobbed once. "Mom, please." I closed my eyes. "I used to carry that house," I said. "Now I carry myself. What do I tell the kids?" He whispered. "Tell them their grandmother is doing just fine," I said, "and maybe one day they'll understand what you didn't." Then I hung up. No goodbye, no promises, just peace. Some mornings Anne and I walk barefoot on the beach. She carries her sandals but never wears them. I bring my journal, though some days I don't write at all. We walk side by side, letting the tide touch our toes, letting the wind take what remains of the past. Forgiveness isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet morning where you finally breathe without waiting to be heard. Anne laughs now. She sings while washing dishes. Her bruises faded, though the memory of them still lives in her eyes. I plant herbs on the balcony. I send handwritten recipes to strangers. I sleep without worry. I enjoy tea in silence. Then one day a letter arrived, real mail, a stamp, a tiny heart drawn next to my name. It was from Lily. "Dear Grandma, I hope you are happy. I miss the smell of your cookies. I miss your hugs." Mommy cried when I said that. Daddy went outside. "I hope I see you again. Love, Lily." There was a drawing of us holding hands, two stick figures. A big smile on my face. I held that letter for a long time. Later that night, when the apartment was quiet, I cried, not from sorrow, from release. Grief says I miss what I loved. Guilt says I should have stayed. That night, I finally set one of them down. The next morning, I wrote back. I told her about the beach, about the seagulls stealing toast, about the lavender and basil growing on the balcony. I didn't mention the house. That wasn't her burden to carry. I sealed the envelope and placed a pressed violet inside. And as I dropped it in the mailbox, I realized something. I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, my place. Years passed. The apartment by the sea became more than refuge. It became a launchpad. Anne and I didn't just survive. We lived, we traveled, we laughed in cheap motels, danced under gas station lights, watched lavender fields bloom. Collected experiences instead of apologies. We became women who told stories instead of excuses. And when the past finally called again, debts, eviction, regret, we didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. We had already given everything. Now we were giving ourselves peace.